Hey, hi, my name is Carly Copley. I work at the Survivor Empowerment Center. I'm the Prevention Education Department for our whole 8 counties that we serve. We have what we call a dual center. We have a domestic violence program as well as a rape crisis services program. And I think when people think of the Survivor Empowerment Center, they really think about us being synonymous with mostly just Carbondale and being a shelter. But I do want to say that we're here for the whole community. That's one of the reasons that we did change our name. We're here for the whole community. We're not just here for women. We're here for men, women, and however people identify in society. So we're here for the whole community. Again, we do have a domestic violence and a rape crisis services program. Under those programs, we also have a children's program. Everybody, I think, already knows about the shelter that we have. We also have transitional housing, as well as prevention education and counseling and advocacy services. If you're in immediate danger, please, of course, call 911. But if you're in a crisis situation and you need to speak with a counselor immediately, we do always have our 1-800 number available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year, yes, even on Christmas. So we are here for the whole community, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody is aware of that. So if you are being abused, or even if you're just questioning, is this abuse? We're here for you. Please reach out if you're questioning your gender identity or your sexuality and you're not sure, or if you think that you're being bullied or abused because of that. You can call our 1-800 number, and we're here to talk to you about that. Tonight, though, we're going to talk about a very specific subject. We're going to talk about the culture of cults, and we're going to talk to a survivor who has wanted to come forward and discuss a little bit more about his experience specifically, and I'm just going to let him talk more about this. This is T. Brown. It was his idea. We don't, at the Survivor Empowerment Center, we don't ask people to come forward and tell their stories. We do ask if someone wants to volunteer, and T has volunteered his time and some of his stories about his experience as an abuse survivor. So where I work, I just want to impart that there's 2 things when someone discloses to you that every single person needs to hear. And this isn't just one person's story. This is the story of everyone I've ever sat with in the hospital. This is the story of anyone I've ever counseled over the phone. Is no one's going to believe me, and it's my fault. And I'm here to tell you the 2 most important things that you can tell a survivor if anybody discloses to you is I believe you, and it's not your fault. So T, I believe you, it's not your fault, and thank you so much for sharing your story. It's not an easy thing to do, and it's not an easy thing to impart this type of wisdom on people from the road that you've had to travel. So thank you for being here, and let's all give him a warm welcome and treat him with the utmost respect.
Is that?
It's not currently being shared. Do you want me to share it?
No, you don't have to share
Okay.
it. Don't share that.
Okay.
Okay. Hi. Hello, people, and hello, people. Hello. I had no idea what to expect, and I just want to say that I know everybody in here, which is, it changes how I feel about this. And I want to acknowledge several things. There's other people in this room who survived the same group that I have, and so they are experts in their own experience. I don't really want to be the poster boy of like cult survivorship. So those of you who are here who were part of the same group that I was, thank you. And wow, this can be emotional. I want to anyway thank you, and your stories are essential to this also. So just a couple things. And this is what's important about this space at the public library that they've given to us is that I think it's best in this, for this occasion, that we not mention specific groups or names here. Now, there's plenty of other places and times for us to do that. And that would include any time for me. There's other people in this room who would be happy to talk specifics, but we want to protect the library from any consequences, legal or other things that might happen by hosting this event. Part of the major dynamic of talking about surviving abuse or surviving a cult is that people want you to be quiet, so that there are people who don't want this to happen. And so just for this evening, we're going to talk kind of in generalities. We can talk specifically, but we're not going to name names, please. And we're not going to, we're just, for the sake of the library, they've been generous to give us space. And if you want more information, more details about these stories, you can talk to me anytime. You can talk to the other survivors in this room who can identify themselves at some point to you, or if they would like to during this talk. And or on Sunday morning at the Carbondale Unitarian Fellowship, we'll have an open conversation there, and we can talk details. We can name names. We can do whatever we want there. All right. So I hope that you understand the sentiment behind that. So I'm going to talk for a while about how this evening has come to pass. Why are we here? Why is this happening right now? And then feel free if you have questions, or if you want to add, if you have questions or want to clarify something, you can interrupt. And then there'll be questions and answers for the last half an hour where you can chime in and share your experience or share the things that you've noticed. We've all touched cultic thinking, cultic cultures in some way. We're seeing it in a lot of different places in our environment right now. So let me take some time to say why are we having this conversation here right now? And it's sort of a long story, so this will take a little bit of time. So personally, I would say, you're not going to get my whole childhood, I promise. I would describe myself as a sensitive, idealistic, justice-oriented, creative person. So I was, writing songs and caring about racism and all this kinds of stuff as a teenager, And in fact, I pursued, having been brought up without any religion at all. Our religion in my family was to vote Democratic. I pursued a religion major in college, and then I went to seminary. And I would describe that as me. I don't even know how to describe that. I liked God language. I liked spirituality, and I liked it when it was imbued with a sense of justice. I was drawn to that. Now, the giant irony of my studies, and I was in New York City at that time, was that I was a very vehemently anti-hierarchical theologian. Like I wrote my frickin' thesis about co-creation and all this kind of heavy feminist stuff about we don't believe in a God up there. We don't believe in these. That's what I wrote about. So through a series of events, I ended up here in Carbondale. Meeting a spiritual teacher. I was not looking for a spiritual teacher. Some people who encounter groups like this are. What I was idealistic and vulnerable for lots of different reasons. And everyone who got into the group has some version of this story. But more than anything, I was drawn to it intensely for lots of reasons. I mean, part of it was, I think I was between things in my personal life, and lots of people encounter powerful spiritual teachers and aren't vulnerable to them. They can just go like, what? No, you know. And I was at first. I had no interest in a guru. As I said, I was against gurus, the whole principle. But this group offered these layers of things that I felt were really attractive. The spiritual practice was attractive. The chanting, the music, the beauty of the places that they had, the flowers, but my tendency was to immediately distrust that. So I was like, what is this, right? And I was an out gay person at the time, and I assumed that they would be homophobic because that's kind of what I normally ran into in the world. But through a series of events and conversations, I came to trust them. I mean, there was like there was the farm. There were these land-based kind of radical political hippie-ish sort of ideals, which I was like, oh wow, like these people they're not dogmatic. This is kind of like juicy and laughing. It was attractive.
Yeah.
And like organic farms, like wow, they care about the environment. And then there were all these stories, like they had nursed in their own home a person with AIDS through their death with their family, and I was like, these people are amazing. Like that was like, that really hooked me. And then for me also the feeling of like, this is a little hard to explain, but like I felt so like damaged all the time. I was just like, oh, I'm a mess, you know. And I had this projection or this feeling that in order to be spiritual, you had to be like I'm like, here I am, I'm all together. Like, and I'm like, well, I'm a big mess. I can't be like that. I'm just like, blah, you know. And there were some very specific conversations with a couple of the women in leadership in this group and they just said to me, oh, me too, I'm just like that. Like, you should see where I come from. Like them telling me their stories of like abuse and like chaos and, you know, being all kinds of slutty and like, oh, you know, it's like the way that we get through life. And I was like, oh my God, you're just like me. So like gradually it was like, and I love this idea that like all these people quit their jobs and up and moved here to be part of something radical. Like I just love that because I want to be part of it. I wanted to be part of that like inner circle thing where like we were really doing it, you know. So that's what I wanted. And then you take that and you add this personality, which is like, I can do it. I can be awesome at this. Like I'm good at languages. I'm smart. I can organize stuff. I just was like, I'm gonna throw all my shit into this, you know, and I'm gonna just be awesome at this, you know. Well, so I quit my PhD program that I was in and I came. And boy, it was exciting. It was all the things, you know. Now, I'm not going to tell you all the details of all the things, you know, because let me just tell you this. 23 years passed. And I had married a woman and we had a child and we homeschooled her and I worked for the businesses. I wanted all of my life to be around this thing, you know, and I went for it. I gave it everything. I gave it all my money. I gave it, now these are sort of, let well, I'm going to speak a little bit chronologically. When I'm in the group, I'm thinking, I'm giving it my all. Tons of, just all my hours, like my energy, my working life, my family life, my child. I even sort of gave my sexuality over, sort of like, well, and then I justified that really in my brain as sort of like, well, this is, my spiritual ideals are greater than my physical needs, manifestation, whatever, however I justify that in my brain. Because you have to kind of talk yourself into that, right? Okay, so we're going to bypass lots of years of stories, and now it's March 2020, and we're hearing about COVID, and I am, after having lived in different situations, like within the community, in communal housing and community-owned housing, working for the businesses, I had moved in with my mother. We were living separately. We had moved out of community housing, and I was living in this house a little bit outside of town with my mother, my wife, and my daughter. And COVID happens. And again, I could talk about this for 7 hours because there's so many stories, but the short version is that rather suddenly, I was not obligated to go every single day to work with the group, to be in the presence of the guru, to go to the managers' meetings, to go to programs nearly every single day. My life was not immersed with them. And there was this feeling, and the first thing that made me realize something was weird was that I felt relief. Now, I wasn't supposed to admit that to myself, that I felt relief. But being in lockdown and stuck in my house, it was like, part of the dissonance, or there's a lot of ways to describe the cognitive dissonance, whatever, being in the group, the way that we think, the way that we're, if Yanya, if you're here, she calls it bounded choice. I think Yanya Lawich said she was going to be on Zoom. She's written all the books about cults. Like, there's a limited way that you can think. You don't have access to all this information, even internal information, right? So I remember, and it's very weird, the timeline, I don't remember. Like, it may have been a week between the first thought I had and the first time I articulated it to my wife at the time. And I remember saying to her something like, and it took me days to get the nerve to say it, like, I feel like, what do you think about stepping back from our community life? And the short version of the story was, she was sort of like, really? Yes. It was terrifying. So, when people are adhering to whatever belief system, I get how scary that is. And I really believe to this day that I would not have been capable of making these breaks had I not had the physical separation of lockdown. I think I would not be sitting here. And what happened, I knew, having been in the group for years and having watched people leave, all of the ex-members in the room left before me, and I got to watch them leave and watch the incredible negative dialogue that happened about them. So anyone who ever left the group was spoken about completely negatively. I never once saw somebody, graciously and lovingly told that, please move on, find the thing that's good for you. That's not how it worked. So I knew that in my backing off, that the thing was going to snowball, and making that break was super scary. So I sent an email that said, I'm backing off my life in the community. And then within 24 hours, emails and phone calls started to come. And for current members who are surveilling me, I never listened to a single one, and I blocked and deleted all of them. Because I knew that I was incapable of having a conversation with these people. There was not going to be a back and forth. Even at that point, I hadn't formulated it. I knew that I could not withstand a conversation with these very powerful people who I had given my power over to. I disappeared, and I knew that I would not be able to stand any kind of ground. I mean, at that point, I didn't even know what ground was. Like, it was too new. So just to describe the next, again, I don't really know how the timeline of everything, but I'm going to say maybe about a month or 6 weeks later, I started to realize that something was not okay with what I had just come from. I mean, the relief I felt, mostly the relief that I felt. And then there was a very slow dawning on me of learning about what had happened. And I want to talk about, at some point I came across, like I think I Googled cults at some point, and I came across this book list, and I ordered like 12 books. Because if it's locked down, I'm like, okay, here's the 12 books, right? And I started reading them. And the first one that really got me, not only was I responding to the topic of learning about being coerced, but I was also alarmed by the topic, because the book is called, I'm blanking on the title. It's got the word totalism in it, and it's Robert J. Lifton. He's a psychologist from 1950s and 60s, Harvard psychologist. So I'm reading this book, and it's about communist prisons. It's about it's about people who were imprisoned in the mid to late 50s in Chinese prisons, where they were physically torturing them to change their thinking. And I'm reading this, I'm like, what does that have to do with me, right? Well, I read it, and I relate it to everything in it. And that was really alarming. Because wait, no, I chose to be there. I wasn't imprisoned. I was part of this sort of like hippie group, we were cool, right? How is it that I relate to these categories that he created around his interviews with people who had survived torturous imprisonment? And I was like, holy crap, that's scary to me that I relate to this. And being a really resourceful person, I connected with all these people who were experts. Like I wrote to Janja Lalich, who's written books about cults. I read Alexandra Stein's book. She's a social psychologist. I found Dan Shaw on YouTube talking about narcissism. He's a psychoanalyst. I wrote to him, and he became my therapist. So like, I guess my superpower is like finding the people. So like, I found them, and they started to teach me, and I started to learn. And then, but the biggest thing maybe is just my personality of just having to express myself. So I picked up my phone one day, and I made a video of myself, and I started to talk about how this felt. And at some point I learned how to put it on YouTube, and I called it Quit Your Cult. And then suddenly, frankly, the town kind of went nuts because no one in this town, after 25 years in this group, not one person had spoken out, not because they didn't want to, but because everyone's, let me not be hyperbolic about this. Many people left feeling ashamed and scared and intimidated. Other people just were like, please, can I leave this behind forever? There were those people like, can I please leave this behind? Now I just, for whatever reason, this person, I I don't know if I was confrontational. I didn't want to get at anybody. I just wanted to express myself because I had spent all those years feeling squashed. Like my voice didn't matter, you know. And so I started making these videos and I started exploring my experience. And over the period of 2.5 years it's been, I've realized, oh my God, like I completely lost myself. And there's a lot of different ways to describe it. And this will soon be a good segue into how I've learned to understand how cults operate. The word cult is pretty inflammatory, and I use it on purpose because, and there are people who are survivors who don't. They'll call it coercive control. I mean, I'll just tell you, I've been watching, there's so many documentaries now. The one that just came out, or the one that's feeding us the second season right now, is called The Vow. It's about a group called NXIVM. And it's pretty alarmist in the news because women were branded and stuff. But I watched this thing and I'm like, this is exactly the same. You know, I'm with my partner, I'm like, I'm pausing. That's exactly the same. It's just like that exactly, you know? So there's this long, slow experience of coming out of a group like this, especially when it's so long, of like being really disoriented for a really long time and this, you know, gradually getting our thinking body back. And then at the same time that you're getting back, you're realizing, oh my God, I lost it. Like I didn't know I lost it. I didn't know. Because when you're in it, you don't know. And then when you're out, you're like, oh my God. and then it takes a long time. Now for me, the biggest example, let me give you 2 examples and then we'll go into this. Getting my gayness back was really not small. I mean, because it was like, it's not just like who I want to, well, I mean, part of it is like who I want to be with, and we all have that. It's like, well, I'm attracted to you. It's also that part of me that was like creative and, you know, impulsive and like, you know, queer in the sense of like, when it wants to mess with things and like, you know, be radical and like break the rules and like, and I found myself in this sort of, I don't know, frog in the boiling water thing, slowly becoming this thing that I wasn't. And so I had very palpable experiences coming out of the group of being like, holy crap, like I had to come out to my wife again and our marriage ended and we're all happier now. And but this feeling of like, I'm back in my body. Like my body is me. You know, it's like, here it is. It's
So you lost parts of your individualism?
I lost all of my individualism. And a lot of people in the town are like, well, they're homophobic. And I'm like, well, it's kind of bigger than that because everyone has their own version. For everyone in the group, however they are individually manifested, you know, however you want to think about that, that can be spiritual. That can be like, for all of us in the group, the express purpose of being in that group was to give yourself over and to surrender yourself. And that meant your feelings and your anger and your creativity and your, you know, and all those things became things you needed to transcend and submit to this divine being. So getting that back was like, oh my God, here, oh, you know, it's, and then it starts with the body, but then it comes into what I love and the food I like and the colors I love and my creativity and, oh, I'm going to write a song now and it doesn't have to be policed by anybody. And it's like, I get to fully express all of this. And so given that, what you're seeing here, it's not just the content, because here I'm describing, there's lots of different ways to think about cults. But okay, I want to say what you're seeing here is not just the content that I've learned about, but it's also, I created these images and I can't really, it's not an exaggeration to say I lost all of my ability, all of it.
All of your what?
Ability to express things the way I wanted to express them. And that includes making images. And it's like if I had made this image in the group, it would have been, micro-managed, critiqued by a group of people. I would have been shamed and told I was wrong, and that's the way it went. And it's like, look, I made a purple thing. I like the purple thing. It's like just that is like the most joyous thing. It's like to make purple stuff. It's like, all right. So I'll walk through this. We have like about 25 minutes left. I'll walk through some of these things that I've learned a little bit about the healing. And again, this is one way to look at it. There's a lot of different. I would say that describing coercive control in intimate relationships and in groups, it's hard because it's confusing.
So is this a particular lens that we're looking through?
You're gonna see Dan Shaw, that stuff I got from Dan Shaw's book about narcissism. And he writes, anyway, you'll recognize it, but again, then at the end of this, there's some other books that I'd recommend that have different perspectives. And if you want to learn about it, if you're looking for your own experience, you will find the language and the way of describing it that fits you in one of these books. They're very distinct, different from one another. So how do I do this?
Just try it in like right.
Just do this?
Yeah.
You can just do it. Aren't they pretty flowers? I learned how to do that. I took a photography class and nobody criticized me, and I made pretty flowers and no one shamed me. And
It's beautiful.
so it doesn't even feel egotistical to say that. It just feels like, oh, everyone can express themselves. Isn't it great? One of the beautiful things about coming out of a cult was sort of like, oh my God, we get to be normal people. Because there's such a striving for perfection all the time. And it's like, oh my God, I can be like a regular, messed up, joyous, chaotic,
Human.
like human. I can be a human.
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't that great feeling? All right, so this is from Dan. And the source is there on the bottom of the key.
Yeah.
And I want to say, I apologize, Dan, I misspelled your name. It looks like Denial Shaw. Cults almost always have a narcissistic leader, grandiose, overinflated, empower themselves and suppress others. And we see this, I think all of us who've been in this kind of environment, when we come out of it, we see it everywhere. Like, oh my God, that president, oh my God, that dictator, that tyrant, and then, tons of religious leaders, and every day there's some church, and it's like, that guy is always there, that same guy. And it's weird. How does that work? I mean, sometimes it's a woman, but mostly it's not. And Dan has tried to, in his books, to sort of paint a little bit of a psychological portrait of this kind of person. He calls them traumatizing narcissists. So this book is from Traumatic Narcissism. Yeah, that guy. Here, you can take the next one. So these are Dan's sort of big ideas about what he sees in cults, that he was in one for a long time, and then just his work with people and studying. So there's always this desire for the purification of the ego. Followers have deficiencies because of ego. It's the leader's job to purify them. So when you come into this kind of group, there's something wrong with us. That guy, there's nothing wrong with him. And it's our job to purify what's here so that we can become like him. And again, no one's like hands you that on a piece of paper when you walk in the door. You sort of gradually learn that's how you interact with this person. And the process of getting inculcated into it is really complicated and personal. Like each of these people here has a story of like, oh, well, I trusted this person. And I had that conversation, and like, they were doing this, the guru thing, you know, you sort of gradually get used to it, and then you learn how to interact with it, and then, but of course, it's easy to see that this idea leads you to always blame yourself for everything. So everything's my fault forever, you know, and I gotta just navigate that and figure it out. This is similar: demand for perfection, devotion, loyalty, obedience, willingness, and ability to recruit others. It's impossible to fully succeed. Now these are, again, this is complicated and nuanced, but yes, you must be perfect. I can give one example, pardon me. After I left the group, I heard from another person who eventually left that they had a meeting about me leaving. Or let me put it this way, there was a meeting of the men in the group, and in it they discussed the fact that I had left. Now, me leaving was of course 100% my weakness and my mental instability. That's how it's always framed. In fact, just yesterday, I'm hearing secondhand things that are coming in, but I'm mostly called mentally ill. That's the belief in the group, that I'm mentally ill. So in this men's meeting, somebody had the nerve, I shouldn't be sarcastic. Somebody in their compassionate heart said, well, maybe we should think about what we could have done better to support, I was called Tarek, and to support Tarek. And the guru says this: are you asking me to lower my standards to the 8?
Oh my God.
Right, so like to hold, you gotta think about holding up the 10 card. It's like, are you asking me to hold up the 8 card? So in other words, for him to let that in at all, that maybe there was something in the group that had anything to do with me leaving, was to lower his standards. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So the demand for perfection is 10. And for him to compromise in any way, and that would mean for him to take what you're feeling or thinking seriously, or to listen to it, or to let it matter to him, would be to lower his standards. So, and also in this group here in town, in the early days, we took explicit vows of obedience. We promised collectively and publicly to obey him and to keep his secrets. Now that happened less and less as in the last 15 years, but that's the way the relationship works. If you come into a relationship with this guru, and this is true across the board in many, like all of these situations, you pledge obedience. And if you're in conflict with that, you have a feeling that makes that difficult. Any problem that you have with that demands the purification of your ego. It's your problem. You better work harder on that. We have some pretty argumentative people in the room, so it was tricky for us, right, to do that. I tend to be sort of subservient anyway, so I was just like, I didn't argue. Others weren't so successful in not arguing. But we all did our best to be obedient. That's what we were supposed to do.
What about this willingness to and the ability to recruit others, this part of it?
Now, it's interesting because in this, other groups are really explicit about like, go out and get people. Now that's deniable in this group. Mm-hmm. They'll say that they don't recruit. At the same time, everything that we did that was possibly public in any way was policed and monitored and corrected. So, for example, if you were the manager of the store, or if you were involved in fundraising locally, or you were involved in city politics, you were to always reflect the sense of the values and ethics of the group, and you were liable to be corrected intensely at any moment you did that wrongly or inappropriately. And that was so when people say like, hey, this, the nonprofit or the businesses, are these okay? I'll say to them, well, every single thing is micromanaged. So every T and I every T is crossed, every I is dotted by the guru. And if it doesn't meet his approval, he can come in and correct it. Everything is fair game, and that's not just the businesses and projects, it's all the people under him. So anything about us was fair game for correction, and our job was to be grateful. So if something came at us that was, you screwed up here, I'm correcting you, you need to do this, like anything that came at us, it was our job to correct, not protect. So that means, yes, thank you. And if we had trouble with how it was delivered, maybe it was aggressive or profane or harassing or abusive, it was our job to be thankful. Thank you. Thank you, Baba, right? And if we felt conflicted about that, then that was something for us to purify, right? Incessant urgency. Now this is something I'm still working on letting go of. Because if I wasn't like urgent, I probably wouldn't be sitting right here. But increased hysteria as they are exposed. And what we're seeing now is that what I'm doing is, and what a lot of us are trying to do is just share our experiences. And the group is becoming increasingly, they feel threatened and victimized. And that's true for any group. We see that in Scientology now. We see it in any group that's insular and cultic. They want you to shut up, and they're increasingly defensive and insular, and that's happening, we know locally. But in the group, you always need to give more time, money, talent, energy, give everything. So, and that again was part of the policing. It's like, where are you spending your money? Do you really have to do that over there? Like, bring everything in. Spend your money at our businesses. Volunteer all of your time. I had a full-time job and a full-time volunteer job, and all of us here in this room and everyone in the group volunteers hours and hours of their time, as much as they possibly can. Money is also, at one point I was giving half of my money immediately back. Like, I would make money, I was paid by the group, and immediately giving half of it back. And that was in tithing, rent that I gave back because I lived in community property, and I had no savings, and that was just, and that was part of my ethic of giving everything. Like, I felt, let me just put I felt like I was doing the right thing. And then I was judging other people who didn't do that. And we were offered financial assessments with the group to see if we could give more money. And that was considered like a valuable thing to do. It's like, here, help me, look at all my money and help me decide, is there something that I can do that I can spend money differently so that I can give you more? That's just an example of the many ways that this worked. So when we left the group, we had, after giving 23 years, my family had $2,000 because we had given everything. So it's always more, it's never enough. There was not a time where someone said, just, that's enough, you did great, that's enough. That did not happen. It's the 10 card thing. Okay. This is intense. Boundary violation as the norm. You cannot satisfy the leader, so you violate your own boundaries and violate others' boundaries. Now this is where it gets really thick, because we hurt ourselves and we hurt each other, and we hurt our children who are raised in the group. Because I'm going to give you one example that was in my head recently. Girls who got their period were publicly celebrated. Now that meant the feeling in the group was sort of like, oh, beautiful, like it's almost like you can imagine in certain other contexts that would be beautiful. Like, oh, she's coming of age, she has her period, we're of the earth, and right? But this was done without consent. There was no consent. Nobody asked an 11-year-old girl what she wanted. and these things were visible. So this is an example of how everything was his business. So when I came to the business meeting on Monday afternoons, which is every week, it still goes on, it wasn't just my business, me managing, the bakery, or me, managing the food that was on the table. My mental health, my marriage, my parenting, my sexuality, my creative activities, all of that was on the table for negotiation, for correction, and for feedback from not just him, but anyone there.
All of the special people.
Yes. And so there was this feeling of like being inner circle. So it was sort of like, well, I get to be part of this, and that just feeds it, right? And often I would be like one of the only men there, so I'm like, well, these men can't handle it. Here I am. So it's like this. It's funny because it's like this giant ego. It's like, I'm so spiritual. But then we are like, we're not like that. We're totally like that. Like it's this really weird split. But the saddest stories around this come around raising a daughter in the group and not trusting her and not listening to her. And that is really hard to digest. As a dad of now an adult person. Go ahead. Inner deviance must be eradicated. Those words are so funny. Only the leader's thoughts and feelings matter. The follower must only serve the leader. Any part of you the leader disapproves of must go. This is a little bit repetitive, but it's yeah, there you go. It's only he mattered. And that pervaded my thinking and my actions for more than 2 decades. So you can understand that after all those years, it would be a little wobbly chicken-legged afterwards to be like, what color do I like? I got literally in my house and I have a blank wall and I'm like, what do I put up there? What do I want to see? Because for all those years, it wasn't something that I made important. Only he got to express himself through his, extravagant hobbies and all the details of his life that I couldn't go into that now. Yeah. All right, so yeah, let's move on. Thank you. I don't mean to be bossing you around.
No, you're fine.
Defend the leader at all costs. So what we see now happening, and what I know that is happening in the group, because this is how these groups operate, is that the narcissism of the leader means that, and the divine, his divine inspiration and self-realization, which he believes, I think, means that any of his behaviors, no matter how abusive, are for good, and he believes that. So if you have been hurt by him, it's your fault, it's your delusion. He's allowed to, and there are all these layers of justification. So the thing that we're seeing right now is that there's a very visible narrative available on video and audio of a close friend of ours describing him sexually grooming her, right? So it's a person describing this in detail from start to finish. We know of at least 4 other women who've had similar experiences. Only one of them has come forward. This thing exists publicly. Thousands of people have interacted with this information. In the group, there's 2 things that have happened. Mostly, they don't have access to it. I believe that mostly in the group, they have not seen it. They have not listened to it. They have not heard it. They may not even know it exists. If they have encountered it, they believe that she's lying and that he he didn't do this. But if he did do it, it's fine because of spiritual justifications, all the reasons.
God told him to do it.
God told him to, all the reasons, right? So what we have recently, because public awareness has really crystallized a lot, I mean, more around town, is that we have stories of somebody currently in the group coming into a business saying, hey, Kelly, hey, will you contribute to this? And then being confronted with, hey, what about these sexual grooming allegations? What's going on with that? Oh, and then the responses are, I don't know about that. I don't believe that. Okay, so and I remember being in the group hearing these vague rumors, and they just can't quite go in for me. Everyone has their own version of that, but it wasn't until I came out of the group that I started to realize, oh my God, these things happen. And now we know that they have happened. I think at first I thought, oh, there's a lot of good stuff happening there. And gradually I've realized, no. Not if a person is capable of the kind of abuse that we hear firsthand from people that we love and trust. And so it's tough when you're in the group because you do lose everything. If you let that information in and you come back into your body and your thinking, which takes a really long time, you do lose everything. And it takes a long time to start to come back from it. So I think recovery, this is a very, very, very easy version of recovery and healing, is that restoring your sensitivity means I matter again. And one of the first things, I shouldn't quote her saying this, but it was impactful for me. One of the first conversations I had with Janja Lalich, she said to me, 5 years. Now it's not hard and it's not that way for everybody, but she said, expect 5 years until you feel like yourself. And so that actually helps me because I'm like, okay, I'm halfway there. Because I have a lot of myself back, but it wasn't until it's 2.5 years to get to this night where I can do this without being scared. Like a year ago, I can't go into the store. I'm just huge anxiety, just difficulty functioning. A lot of layers of confusion, and so the long process and it's different for everybody. Restoring your sensitivity means my feelings matter, my body matters, my thinking matters, and that I will not defer that to anyone else's authority. Like this is, and he taught us exactly not that. Exactly not that, was you don't matter. So I think there's to have a sense of one's intrinsic worth and value. This is gonna make me cry so hard. It's like intrinsic worth and value. We did not have that. Now there was some kind of spiritual worth that was not somehow related or manifested in our daily interactions, right? To know what one thinks and feels. Like, oh, I think this and I feel this. I get to express it and I get to be heard. That was not the experience in that group. To know what one wants and doesn't want. I can have this, I don't need to have that. In the group, everything was shamed, even dietary choices, right? Like your health choices, your parenting choices, your cultural choices, like, hey, I like punk rock, It was like, it's like nothing is, it's like.
Even if you needed to sit on a chair instead of the fucking floor.
You're sitting on a chair and you're shamed, right? You shouldn't need that. You shouldn't, all the things you shouldn't need, right? To feel, this is a big one, to feel free to assert the legitimacy of one's own point of view. Like, hey, buddy, this is what I think. And when you try that in the group, you would be publicly shamed. And so we all learned not to do that because that was horrible what just went down there, and I don't want to be that person, right? You all know that was around. So I guess next one. All right, so anyway, it's been an hour, this is great. So these are books that I've read and I have on my shelf and that I recommend to people. Janja Lalich is a PhD sociologist. She was in a political cult for a really long time. She writes really brilliant, kind of conceptual stuff about how cults work, how the thinking works in them. She's a badass, and her books tend to be, in my experience, pretty easy to read. Robert J. Lipton is the book that I talked about. That book is really amazing about, he comes up with these 8 categories about how to describe thought reform as in brainwashing. Like, how does that work or not work? Dan is a psychoanalyst. He was in a cult for a long time, was an activist after he came out, kind of doing what I'm doing. And he writes these brilliant books talking about the psychology of the narcissistic leaders and how the groups work. Alexandra Stein is brilliant, British woman from England who came to the United States as a teenager and was part of this kind of communist, Marxist cell cult thing, not religious at all, in the Twin Cities, and has a great, wonderful memoir about it that I just read, which is totally easy to read. And her book describes, in my mind, the thing that I love the most that she describes is how in the group and how abuse works in intimate relationships is that, and with this guru, the way that it worked was that he is the one that abused us and made us feel so disjointed and dissociated and horrible, but he was also the source of the solution and the source of the remedy. So what that does to your brain. So in other words, we were always supposed to go to him to talk and to get guidance, and we were supposed to want that. But at the same time, he was the one who destroyed us. So like how, and so Alexandra Stein in this book, Terror, Love, and Brainwashing, describes that. And I was like, yes, so I'm reading these books and I'm thinking like, yes, that's exactly it. And I'm still doing that, the only 2.5 years out of being like, oh my God, yeah, that's. So I think a part of the healing of getting our subjectivity back is getting our brain back and realize, and like, oh yeah, that's what happened to me. It's really important that I think we understand in whatever way we come to understand. Yeah, that happened and I did that, and I'm not stupid, and it wasn't my fault. And that's a hard one because we're adults and didn't we just choose to walk in there? Well, the whole thing is set up to rope us in, keep us there, and help us to deny ourselves. And the one story I'll leave you with is that 5-6 years ago, I rarely sought his personal guidance because it was so scary and difficult. But I did go to him 5 years ago and basically said something to him like, am I just gay? Like, why is my marriage hard? You know? And he said to me, do you really think you're going to find a Sufi guy who's as committed to this as you are? You think you're going to find that person? And I was like, I'm going to imitate myself. I was like, no, I'm not going to. You're right. And so I went back to my marriage for 5 more years. And I believe that if he was a real spiritual teacher, he could have said to me in those first 6 months, you know what? Go be a gay guy. That's your nature. Go do that. But instead, he led me down a path which took me farther from myself instead of closer to myself. And I think that's, in general, the experience of the people who have come in and been chewed up and spit out of that group. Okay, so I'm gonna let, yes,
Kurt, oh, sorry, Kurt, let's just go ahead and have Carly like kind of ask the questions, if that's okay. Like you all can ask questions and then you just kind of ask them again to pick it up.
Oh, to pick up the mic.
Yeah.
so Carly's gonna facilitate this, and
Yeah, so don't mind hearing the questions twice, but yeah.
they also don't have to be questions to me. I know there's people in the room who have similar experiences or.
I actually have a question I've been wanting to ask you, and did you have access to Wi-Fi or the internet or social media or time to be on those things at all, ever?
Sure, we weren't limited in our access. I think we were limited in our ability to grok certain things. I mean, it's like there's sort of a wall around what I was.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, that's part of the illusion of the group too. Sort of like, hey, we go to movies and we like music and we like rock and roll and we're doing this thing and we're, it wants to show itself not as insular, That's part of how it protects itself.
Thank you. Yes, please.
You didn't mention this in your experience, but as a former cult member, 21 years now, I think. And I think the biggest loss for me is that it's very hard for me to find anything to believe in anymore. And I think that's the biggest loss for me.
Yeah, I can't, maybe it'll change, but I can't meditate.
So-
I can't.
I want to repeat what she
Yeah.
said
Oh,
so
yeah,
everybody
thanks.
else can
Thank
online
you.
can hear.
All right.
I don't, I won't be able to do it quite with your sentiment because of your experience that someone who's left after 21 years of being in a cultic or a coercive environment has asked, or basically just stated, it's hard to find something to believe in again. It's hard to find a connection to a belief system again.
I'm afraid it's impossible.
Okay, and it almost impossible, nearly impossible. Is it possible? Do you
Maybe
have a
this will
response?
help me to read some of this material or something,
Do you have a response to that, or anybody else in the room?
Well, I would say that's part of the work we can do going forward is like, now that we're finding each other, it's like, because I know that, anyway, I'd be interested in some of what you have to say, but it's too new for me. Every time I try to meditate or do anything like that, it's just the mantras and it's him and it's hard.
I have two things. So someone asked on to switch the screen, so I don't know if the slides are still up or not.
Oh, can we,
Oh.
are the slides still sharing? or-
No, they're not. Unfortunately, we're not gonna be able to switch the camera around to a different angle. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, someone just wrote switch the screen, but I wanted to make a brief comment and then lead that into a question. I was part of the same cult that T was in. I left in 2013, 2014 timeline, and I can attest to what he says. And also, I believe the woman that came forward about the abuse, she's not lying, and the guru insists that she is lying and that he is mentally ill, and he is wrong. And this same guru asked me to hack somebody because I have computer skills, and I didn't do it. But what else happened? And the more that I learn over time, the more I see that everyone that was devoted, there was a devotion without conscience. That's not freedom. And I bought into it at the time. And if someone came to me back then and said, hey, the guru has done this and here's the allegations, I would have been hard pressed to believe it because I was so devoted. So my question is, awareness is good. Getting information out there, using social media to communicate is good. To protect other people so they don't fall into the same elements of pain that we have dealt with as people that are survivors of the group. So what are some of the best ways to support people that are either coming out or might be thinking of coming out? Like what's the best way to do that from your perspective?
So that's a great question. I'm going to reiterate just at the end of it.
Yes.
There was a lot of support for T is experience from someone else who had a very similar experience in the same group. And the question is, what is the best method to support somebody who's coming out of a coercive controlling group or a cult-like group? How can you support them? How can you be there for them? How do you show up for this person? How do you show up for multiple people if you need to?
Can I ask you if you would answer that
Of
from your
course,
perspective, and
yeah.
I'll chime in.
I mean, of course, we always go back to the I believe you and it's not your fault, but it's also, it's more than that. It's how do you help that person build back their consent? How do you help that person build back their confidence? How do you help that person build back their individuality and rebuild the community? Because losing a community is, I can't speak to that like you can.
So you can speak to intimate partner violence, which I think is very similar.
Yes, but
All right,
losing your community and losing especially like a huge piece of your individuality, like your spirituality, and then having to move on after that. So how do you rebuild someone's consent? And it's little by little, day by day. And I think Yanya is pretty spot on, like about the 5-year mark. But I mean, I want to say it's 5 years for you, it's 5 years for you, it's 5 years for you, it's 5 years for you. It's gonna depend on the length of the abuse, the severity of the abuse. It's going to depend on the type of abuse, how personal it was, how intimate it was, what you were stripped of, and what were your protective factors growing up? What were your risk factors growing up? Going back to not only, I think everybody knows ACEs as a household name, your adverse childhood experiences, but we also, now there's a new terminology called PACEs, and it's not disqualifying but positive. And so that kind of really just means your protective factors, right? So it can go back to your childhood and your adolescence and what happened to you and made you the person that you are. And all of these protective and risk factors, I mean, it's going to be as individual as each of us sitting in this room. So there's no one right answer. It's going to take, I mean, it might be like an average, it might take 5 years for most people, but if it takes you longer, or if it takes you less time, there's no, don't compare yourself to other people is the best answer. And just show up for them, show up for somebody, and just, be there for them the best way you can. And I mean, T, I think that you've done a great thing with connecting with community and offering what you have with the podcast. I think you've offered support to a lot of the people in this room, as well as people not in this room, and just connecting. Don't forget about the importance of connecting with other people that have not only gone through this, but maybe you need a network of people who haven't gone through this, so you can just be yourself around them, but not have to talk about your experience sometimes. And maybe you need a separate network of people who you need to talk about this with and connect with them. So it's a very important question. And I mean, I think we could spend a whole 7 hours going over that, or a whole conference going over that. So I thank you for that question. And I think to be continued. And I think we have some knowledge here in the audience too. So if there's something else somebody wants to say, please.
Can we do one of the online questions too next?
Is this connected to the
It
program?
is.
Okay, I want to finish this conversation
Okay,
first,
sounds good.
please.
It's interesting, I just last night had a very lengthy phone conversation with one of the members who's on the fence. Somebody that's been there for many, many years before I was even in the community. I've been gone 10 years. And I asked her do you know what's going on? Yeah. Like, okay, have you really looked into it? Well, yeah. Have you watched the video of the young woman who, by the way, took 20 years to come out about her experience because she was so traumatized?
Mm.
Well, I watched part of it. And I'm like, I dare you to watch the whole thing. And if you come back to me again and tell me that you're still with this man, good for you, and don't ever call me again, I want nothing to do with you. Now, I know that's not maybe the best thing to do, but, you know, I'm devil's advocate, it's like, if you really believe what she's saying and that's okay, fine, I'll leave you alone.
Well, but that's also a personal boundary that you have to put up to protect yourself.
Yeah.
If I can just,
Yeah.
and good for you for, if that's your personal boundary, no one gets to question that, and no one gets to take that from you again, right? Because you have consent, you have control over your life now. So that's a great way to put things and a great way to reframe things. But I also want to say that we want to keep a lifeline for someone. We don't ever want to be that last door that shuts to them. And so I don't want to say what's right or wrong for one individual person. I just want to say, like, as a general blanket statement, if we can keep a lifeline, like, you know, don't ever call me, call us blah 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 instead, or, you know, like maybe get just some little, like, you know, you can reach out to T, but don't call me because I just can't, and that's my personal boundary.
Yeah.
And so that's a good distinction to make. And so I think Jennifer had someone online that had a comment or a
Yeah,
question.
there are a few online questions. We have a little over 10 minutes before we'll have to wrap it up, unfortunately.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
It feels so like online questions.
Right. Okay, you mentioned that your superpower was finding resources. Would you provide a list of those? I feel like maybe.
It does.
That was the sources,
Yeah.
and that was maybe going back to a little bit of what Kurt was saying about, can we share that slide again?
Right, yeah. Okay, can a cult have a hidden leader, as in a person who controls everything but tries to act or mislead people into thinking they are not a totalitarian leader, a servant leader?
Sounds kind of like the man behind the curtain in the Wizard of Oz a little bit, doesn't it?
I mean, I guess one of the things that you'll see in the NXIVM documentary is that, and this is true for the local cult too, is that he keeps a low profile in public. And it's the women who surround him who are like the executive directors and the front facing people. And so what you're saying is like, I guess I would just describe that as a different way of being narcissistic. It's like whatever they got to do to like, but one of the patterns I see is they're not way out there. In general, what we often see is they let the women do the public facing stuff. You know, it's not always true, of course, but it's something we see over and over again in these groups.
I think this was maybe answered a little bit too. How can we genuinely help family members who are emerging from a cult? I feel like you spent some time on that.
Well, I do want to say, and you just, she just said this, is that it takes a lot of people a really long time.
Mhm.
So, and so one of the things that's happened is that since now this is becoming a little bit more, there's a public discussion where there wasn't before. Lots of people who have been out for a long time have realized, holy crap, I didn't feel from this. Or there's a lot more work to do, I didn't even know it. I was just kind of like getting through. And especially with the sexual abuse, the damage that's done is really deep. And one of the things that I've seen recently is that even people who have come out since I have, let me give you one example. A person who was raised in the group from a child came out of the group and didn't contact me for a year because he believed that I was dangerous. And so he had no support. Like he came out of the group, he was alone in an apartment, like trying to get by, having all the difficulty and not able to reach out for support because he still believed that the people who were out were dangerous. It's like, it takes a really long time to unwind that and to start to trust each other. And, you know, I think a lot of people have had the experience of like, holy crap, that was 15 years ago and I still can't meditate or whatever, I still can't, like my prayers are still.
And if I can relate this back to intimate partner violence, it can take up to 7 times, or I mean, that's the average. It can take less or more for all of the reasons I stated earlier, right? The length of the abuse, how intimate it was, how personal it was to you. But it can take, 7 times is the average for an intimate partner. So think about that, how magnified that would be if it's a coercive, controlling group. If you're having to leave behind your faith, your community, everything that you knew that was your identity, because your identity has been replaced by all these conditions, right?
Yeah.
This conditioning.
Even our jobs, a lot of us had jobs.
We worked for them.
There's savings to, so there's financial abuse, there's emotional abuse. And I know a lot of people in this room are talking about a specific coercive, controlling group, but if you want to expand that to other things outside of that realm, and this one group, I mean, we have people in other types of religious controlling groups. We have people in other very coercive job and workplaces, and I think a lot about like multi-level marketing. I think a lot about just different political factions and just different factions of people that individuate themselves collectively. I don't know if you can say individuate collectively, but they, as a collective, they're saying we're different. We have, why don't you change your name, change the way you dress, and so we can show how we're unified together. Like, there's a lot of these red flags that we talked about last year with this coercive control.
Yeah, I want to mention something. Okay, I ran into a Reddit post today, so if you're listening, I want to acknowledge the existence of lots of very coercive other religious groups in the area and everywhere. And there was one specific one that I read in a Reddit post today about a local church. So I want to acknowledge anyone who might be out there, because I know these people, that we have a lot in common, and that there's other people who feel like they've been part of something. There are a lot of other local groups that have very similar characteristics. And so we can connect and we can help each other. And I do want to say to that last question, one other thing, which is that I have run into, back in the 80s and 90s, there were these people who would like go in and rescue people from cults and like kidnap them back, but they can't do that anymore because that's legally not okay. But so these sort of,
And does it even work?
Shows how desperate the family was.
Yes.
these
Yeah, it does.
the people who work, there are people who work with like a family member comes and says like, help, my daughter's in a cult, what do I do? And a lot of their advice now is maintain, kind of what you were saying, like maintain a connection.
That lifeline, like.
Yeah, so.
And maybe you put a personal boundary, like it's not me, but here are 5 other people. Maybe you take turns because you each have a personal boundary that you don't want to cross.
So I've been approached by people who still have family members in the group here, and there's very little they can do, but they can just maintain a connection for the hope that at some point in the future, that person will trust them with that, because they have to make a decision inside themselves, which is really hard, but trying to convince them of anything doesn't work.
Quick shameless plug for the Survivor Empowerment Center and a little bit of the work that we're doing related to this question. We are working with a couple of churches locally about sex abuse policies in religious settings. And so we're working with a lot of the open and affirming churches first. And if you want information on that, I'm not going to mention them on this. I don't have their permission to do that yet. But I'm working with a lot of the open and affirming churches, and I think that they would be fine with me mentioning them later in a public setting. But I would like to talk to them about that and have a deeper conversation about that. But if you're interested in that work, I'm going to have some business cards, and I have a couple of different flyers about just the information in general at the Survivor Empowerment Center. So if anybody wants to stick around, we can have a private conversation. We can go maybe somewhere else in the library, not too long, because I think the library closes at 8, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So,
I'm sorry.
But I've got brochures, I've got a couple of business cards, and we can carry this conversation on another time. I mean, this isn't the end all be all when the library closes, right? This is just the beginning of several conversations that we'll keep having throughout this community, because I think one of the best things that Tia's ever said to me about framing this narrative. And I don't want to say the best, but one of the most poignant things that T has ever said to me about framing this narrative of what happened is how vulnerable Carbondale is. And can you talk to just a little bit about that, like the tip of the iceberg, about that conversation that we had about how
Carbondale is like the vulnerable teenage person. Like it's the perfect town for this to happen because nobody batted an eye. Like they showed up, they opened businesses, and it was always like, thank you, thank you, thank you. Plus, it was like, we're liberals, so we accept your different religious expression. And you know, if they had showed up in, forgive me,
Well,
if they showed up in Marion, it might be like,
with the
Who are you
university.
yeah. So the culture of Carbondale
Yeah.
was perfectly ripe for this group to come and you know,
When people are at a crossroads, right?
establish themselves
Mhm.
with strength and with impunity.
And one of the other religious organizations that was mentioned a lot on this Reddit is they actually have a model that they move to college towns
Yes.
and smaller college towns at that. And so, you know,
And
that's
start
that's
small
a model,
organizations too.
Where there's a need, where there's a need.
yeah, exactly.
Makes sense.
I'd like to thank this center for doing this and hosting this, and always thank you, and thank the library so much for, you know, having this space.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you to T and every other survivor in this room, whether you name yourself or not. I know that there's a lot of us in this room, and whether it's been, you know, a coercive controlling environment or some type of personal violence that you've ever experienced. I know that a lot of us have a lot of baggage that we walk around with every day. So I just want to, you know, give yourself a little pat on the back, give yourself a little hug, give yourself a little cup of tea at the end of the day, give yourself a little self-care when you get home, you know, do something kind for yourself. Maybe don't watch your documentary about a cult tonight. Maybe you know, just do something extra kind for yourself. And if you can and you have the energy and the resources, reach out and be that connection or that lifeline for someone, either that's out of that coercive controlling group or still in. If you think that you have you know, if you can be a lifeline for someone and it doesn't violate your personal boundaries. If it does violate your personal boundaries, set those boundaries and, you know, never let anybody trample those again, because, you know, I think that probably almost everybody in this room is a survivor of some type, and if you're not, you probably know one. So again, you know, remember, I believe you, it's not your fault, and just treat people with the utmost kindness if they ever disclose to you, because that means they hold you in the highest regard, and so treat them with that same kindness. So October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. We have several more programs coming up at the Survivor Empowerment Center. Please look at our Facebook page if you want more details about the specifics. But we are going to have a second outreach office opening in Carbondale in combination with MantraCon and Survivor Empowerment Center, and Carbondale United is going to have like a one-stop shop for empowerment, jobs, and racial justice, and, you know, taking our city back, right? So if you want more information and the specifics on the address and the times, that's actually going to be tomorrow evening, and the address and the time will be on that flyer, both on the Carbondale United and the SEC page, the Survivor Empowerment page. Thanks again to our wonderful host, Jennifer, and the Carbondale Public Library. Thank you to T, thank you to everybody for being here tonight. Anything else you would like to say, any parting words, T?
Thank you to the School of Communication Studies. And if my siblings are here, I love them.
Oh, I love it. Family love, I love it.
Thank you guys so
Thanks.
much.
Thank you.